So, I want to briefly talk about what is intersectionality, because I'm seeing a lot of huge misconceptions about what intersectionality is. So a lot of people are like, intersectionality, we mean you must do everything for everybody in all cases, treat everything similar, everything is the same, racism, same as sexism. I see a ton of confusion. No, that's not what intersectionality is about. Intersectionality is about recognizing the complexity and that some people might be left behind. So, the original person that talked about intersectionality was a black woman, both of which I'm not, Crenshaw. And what she pointed out is that a lot of movements for white women or for black people left out black women. She also pointed out how they were disproportionately hurt and that we need to talk about both of them. Here's some examples that you can list more from the original articles. 1. If you're talking about feminine hygiene products, they affect poor people a lot more, and black women are poor. If you're talking about programs to get out of abusive households, they affect black women more. If you're talking about, because they just can't afford it. If you're talking about education, well, it's worse for black women because now they have to face pressure, both stigmatizations to get education, and education equals money. Now they don't get the money, they don't get an education, and it leads to a cycle. There's many more examples, and that if you look at the data, they over and over again, it's worse than just being black or women alone. It's being a black woman. It's getting better, but that's more of her deal. I want to talk about more my deal with intersectionality. I have severe migraine disorder and a couple other health conditions, and I have autism, dyslexia, and stuff like that. Together, they're worse. Just they're neither one of them alone. Because of my autism, dyslexia, and stuff, I don't make proper eye contact. I sometimes get confuzzled, confused with my words. I missign papers all the time. I misdo papers. I have a lot of time. I have a lot of trouble organizing doctor's appointments, and so on and so on. So then that means that I don't get the medical attention I need, or it's not taken seriously. Now the medical attention, being sick all the time hurts me from being taken seriously because I don't have as much time and ability to advocate myself or be productive, or I'm more out of it than usual, so I don't have the energy to process what people say or get organized and stuff like that. So together they impact it, and together they can move also financial drain and burden. Intersectionality is about looking at all the pieces that might hurt a person, then trying to figure out how to alleviate from everyone. It doesn't mean in all cases we have to include everyone. We have to talk about every single identity. If there's an idea that's better for education as a whole, yes, we talk about that bad idea for education as a whole. If there's a program to make us safer drugs, then we just do that. We advocate for suffrage for women. Fine, we advocate for suffrage for women because that affects all women. But that does not mean, what if our movement leaves behind some people? That's what we're talking about oftentimes when intersectionality. Again, what if a women's movement forgets about impoverished women? What if a lot of the women's suffragists in the beginning didn't want black women to get voting rights and talk about how it would actually increase the voting power of white people disproportionately, which it actually did, because white people, women had a lot more opportunities to vote because they had the most free time, a lot more free time than black women, so they can get out, and they had also less barriers. So they actually had a point there. Including Susan B. Anthony and all those this women's suffrage, incredibly racist, and that was one of the main talking points. So, intersectionality is not about, oh, every movement has to talk about every identities. We don't want to exclude everyone. The other one thing about intersectionality is seeing a common problem between identities. It's not saying that every identity is the same. Sir, poverty, lack of education, it affects both POC communities, it affects disabled communities, it affects poor people, it affects disabled people, it affects neurodiverse, it affects all these different communities. So talking about a better education system, yes, it's a common problem. Problems with wealth inequality affects all these people. But we also need to recognize the difference. And intersectionality talks about that. The difference is how different identities collide again, and how helping one community might not help another one. Sir, for the disabled community, if you're talking about increasing therapy and just putting a bunch of therapy, increasing mental health care and therapy in there, it might sound at first like a great idea. Great idea, just expand therapy as much as possible. Everyone gets mental health care and stuff. But what about the first harmful therapies that a lot of autistic people get that are bona fide conversion therapies based on behaviorism? What about the therapies that are pushed heavily on autistic communities like ABBA, which are conversion therapy? And I can show you quotes. It's all about taking a normal person, taking an autistic person, and we identify the bad and good behaviors. You might wonder what's bad behaviors. It's defined as anything atypical, not bad for their mental health. And good behaviors are typical behaviors that stand out less. And using conditioning, punishment, rewards. Punishment includes ignoring to train them to be a normal person, so-called. This therapy causes lifelong damage and harm in so many ways because you're treating that person like an animal. They lose extrinsic motivation. Now they need to be motivated by actual rewards all the time. They feel pressure to conform by these rewards if they're positive. If they can't do something in a normal way, they feel forced to do it in a normal way. Beyond feeling forced, you don't look for alternatives. If they can't tie their shoes, you force them to tie their shoes. You don't look for slip-ons. You don't look for alternative. And you waste so much time and energy and you use up the energy. The ignoring is one of the most harmful things. Isolation is one of the worst forms of torture. And then punishment is also horrible, but that makes them feel like they're not adequate. And all those things, you don't treat them like a talking person, so you don't teach them how to think, how to communicate, how to set boundaries, and you might make huge mistakes with them. So when we're talking about promoting better mental health care and stuff, you need to include the autistic community, because just all around paying more money in healthcare and promoting more files is not going to help the system. And like you also need to talk about when we're talking about education. That's what intersectionality really is about. It's being inclusive. It's not about treating all the issues the same. We have to recognize there's differences. Ableism has some racism, but it's very different. Racism, you're often born into a family that's experienced. Like I think the main difference in racism and ableism, and this one is more contentious because I'm white, is that racism you're born into a family more often, and this is also generalization. You're born into a family often that has suffered this for generations or has experienced or community, and that community sometimes you can more easily. There's hidden disabilities, but if we talk about hidden disabilities, you can compared to hidden disabilities, it's more easily recognized what race you are. There are also POCs that look very white, so it's more. That's less of an overlap. But you're born into a community, and it's oftentimes more easily recognized. And that community both means that you have generational harms that's been over and over generations to your family, to your people. But it also means you have a community to talk about this and work together. When in a disabled community, you don't. You find your peers as you grow up, and sometimes you have isolated, so it's a very hard time to find your peers. A big difference between racism and ableism, I also think, is a lot of disabled people are not able to protest in the same way because we can't go out there and put our bodies on it. If you're wheelchair, it's hard to protest and be disruptive by the same means. It's hard to protest if you have noise sensitivity. I repeat when I'm overwhelmed. I repeat whatever people are saying around me. That's troublesome if you are allowed to protest because, well, if the other side is saying something awful or you're just not thinking anymore. I get lost when there's too much stimuli, overwhelmed. A lot of it just makes traditional protesting methods just not able for disabled. So we're mostly doing online and education things, which is different, which is also has its pros and cons. And also, it's more easy to become disabled or change later on in life than the other way around. And to some extent, masking is complicated. Depends on what people see compared to hidden disabilities. But yeah, those are important differences to recognize with how the activism works, and we can learn from each other. But there's also a huge intersection with these two, where both elitism really affects us, and UK is one of the most ablest countries, but they're also the fact of colonialism. Elite problems of education affect both of us. That's intersectionality. Well, thank you very much for this brief talk on intersectionality. I hope you found it interesting. If you have any ideas or comments or likes, just leave them below in the comment section. Also, feel free to DM me. Please like and subscribe. I'm trying to reach 1,000 subscribers within a year, which is really hard, but I think I'll be able to do it with you. Thank you very much.